Morning, friends. I hope you're enjoying the trilogy of Where the Cutthroat Are. It's filmed all in Rocky Mountain National Park. Stay tuned for the third and final episode of the trilogy. It's going to be pretty epic. Today, I'd like to share some tips and helpful hints and information for you for when you're out searching for that high mountain lake, or you're planning a trip. Maybe it's a new lake that you've never been to. Maybe you're a beginning angler, just getting into this. Here we go. Now in volume 2, I was casting to the brook trout and I was trying to incorporate some tips. That's what I like to do in the videos, incorporate the tips or the hints as I'm fishing. I said look behind you. Always look behind you when you're casting, up here in the mountains, especially small creeks. Walking the perimeter of these lakes, there's always bushes. There's always a tree that's going to get your fly. So always look behind you. Go cast a fly rod at your local fly shop. Have someone help you select a fly rod. See what the differences are in the different 5 weights, the different 4 weights, 3 weights. But any of those types of rods are good. I personally use a 3-weight fly rod. 7'6". The reason why I go with such a short fly rod in my adventures up here to these high lakes, we're actually sitting up here at about 10,400 feet camping. I've got my kids today, is because I like to go to the outlet streams. And the outlet streams are usually somewhat treacherous hiking, stumbling around, but if you stick within the water or right next to the bank of the water, a lot of times you'll have a little bit easier foot traffic right along the river's edge. But the outlet streams are usually close quarters type fishing. So that's why I take a 7'6". Anything smaller than that, you're gonna have trouble casting beyond 20 feet probably, or 15, 20 feet, somewhere in there. Which you should never have to do on a small stream, by the way. If you're gonna spend $400 or $500 on a really nice reel, I would suggest that you use the reel. Too often I see guys out on the streams, lakes, rivers, and they have a really high-end reel, and they're hand stripping when they sit the hook on a fish. They're just hand stripping. I don't know what the point is, personally, and not getting the fish to the reel and using the reel. I try to get the fish to the reel as quickly as I can. It's not always the case, and I'll be hand stripping too, but I like using the reel. Now, I'm also going to give you a couple of tips here for dry fly fishing and dry dropper fishing, which is my personal favorite type of fishing. For those of you who are new to high lake fishing, a lot of times when you arrive at a lake, I have said this in my previous videos, take the time to sit, observe the lake, look at the structure, the contour, whether there's rising fish, whether there's cruising fish. That's going to make your whole day so much more enjoyable. If you just pull out some line and start casting, you might be spooking fish that are right in front of you. So a helpful hint here then is, where do you start? Choose a fly or a dry dropper if you don't see any activity, and go with something that you're comfortable with. Choose a caddis, choose a mayfly, choose a black ant. Those are some of the more common patterns that you can use up here. And then tie a dropper on to the end of that. Now I'm going to give you a real tip that I learned a long time ago from an old fly fishing friend of mine. Not a lot of dry fly fishermen even know this. What I did when I was a kid is I tied on my first dry fly. Say you're using 5X tippet. I would tie another piece of 5X tippet on and then tie my dropper on. What I started doing is I would cut that 5X tippet off and tie the 6X on to the 5X tippet behind the dry fly. Now I tie to the bend of the hook. And what that does for you is it allows for that dropper to have a little more rigidity in your casting motion, or if you're using 3X to a dry fly and you tie on 5X or 4X or 6X to a dropper, it's going to want to hinge and have the tendency to wind around your fly because of the tippet change right there at your fly. It's a hinge point. So what you're essentially doing is you're just basically taking whatever X tippet to your dry, tie on a short piece of the same diameter, and then use your double or triple surgeon's loop, blood knot, whatever you like to use. I personally use double surgeon's loops. You can use a triple 3-turn, but I don't think it's necessary. That's a whole nother subject. But you could use a double surgeon's loop and then tie on your dropper, and now your little hinge point is over here, and it will help prevent, one, the dropper from tangling around the dry, and two, that hinge point will be kind of down here, so it will actually help you cast a little bit better too. In the second part, the Ouzel Lake trip, when I was going after the greenback cutthroat there toward the end, he was rising and then going down, rising and then going down very slowly. And when I tried to time my cast when he was looking up, he would move to the side. That's an indication that those types of fish could be an indication, but it was in my case, that fish was very spooky. I found that to be the case with greenback cutthroat trout especially. There aren't that many places to find the pure strain greenback cutthroat trout, but they are very spooky. I don't know if that's just in their nature, but they will readily take a dry fly. So what I did in those situations, which is really helpful for spooky or wary fish in tailwaters, especially the larger fish that are spooky and have seen a lot of flies, seen 1,000 fly fishermen, and you can stand there and cast over them. They won't move out of the way, but they won't take your fly. Yes, those kinds of fish. When they're actually taking dries off the surface or sipping emergers or flies in the surface film, what I'll do is wait for that fish to take and then start to go down, and I'll watch them in time in between their rises. So when they're going down, that's when I'll make my cast. I'll time my cast like I did in the Ouzel Lake video to where the fish is going down. When the fish is going down, they can't see your cast overhead because they're looking down. Make the cast the appropriate distance upstream so that when that fly drifts down, the fly is going to be over their feeding window and they're going to be ready to come up for it. So you try to time it by casting it a certain distance upstream. Another one that I can recommend is using a parachute / reach cast combination. It's a little bit more advanced, but all you're really doing is shooting your line out to a spot above the water, letting the fly stop, and then it parachutes down. That's the parachute cast. And so you're doing a parachute and then moving your arm to the left or the right, and you're aiming for a spot above the water and then moving your line so that all that line is off of the feeding lane of the fish. Another helpful tip for you is how to fish the dry dropper in a lake. Well, you might say to yourself, well, that's easy because the lake doesn't have any moving water, or it just sits there. You just wait for the fish to cruise around. Well, I've given you some tips on how to look for the shelves and the contours. In my experience, especially with cutthroat trout, and I've seen brook trout cruising in the same fashion. Ouzel Lake was a good example. They were cruising the edges just like cutthroats. Okay, so I'm getting off track here. Using the dry dropper combo, actually there are some helpful hints that I believe that can help you catch more fish. One, once you've made that cast, fly fishing is a weird thing. When you first learn, they say cast that line straight, get that line straight, and you're casting out and there's your fly, and great, this is awesome. And then you go to the river and you do it, and now you've got a lot of drag on that fly, and they're like, boy, your cast is too straight. What you need to do is cast it straight, but you need some slack in there. Right? So that's kind of it's kind of a conundrum. I don't know, paradox? Anyway, you want to be in contact with your fly with a little bit of tension, yet you don't want to have enough tension on there that creates drag. So in the high mountain lakes, what I like to do is I'll take my dry dropper, cast it, I'll use my fingers just a little bit to move and adjust the line so I have just enough movement in the fly that doesn't create a wake or any kind of drag on the surface. And that way, once the dropper has hit the water, it's sinking, but then it's rising as you're twitching it. And then you let it sit, and then the dropper sinks, and then you move it just a little bit more, and it pulls that dropper up, sort of like an emerging midge. Now, midges don't really swim, as far as I know. They will move slowly. And the midges will come up slowly, right? A lot of times you're going to get a take as it's dropping. I don't know why, but you do. And then what it also does, it allows you to stay in contact with the dry fly. So if I'm casting to the left, because I saw a cruiser working left to right, I'm casting to my left, and then I see a big rise to my right, I might cast in the middle. Maybe I have an opportunity at both fish. If neither one of them, if they both cruise by and I don't even get a look, it might be time to reevaluate your fly. I'm stubborn, so I like to just stick with it. Cast to my right, cast to the middle, cast to the left. That's your fan casting. You're fan casting and exploring a whole area. Another helpful hint for when you're hunting these fish close to the banks, they are working in close to the banks. I'm going to tell you right now, your footsteps walking on the ground, they'll hear you. They'll feel that in their lateral lines. And a lot of times they'll be cruising and just sort of stop and wait. That means they're thinking to themselves, something's going on here. It's not right. So just stay still. You might have another cast out of it. The other thing that's most obvious is obviously any kind of movements. The fish can really sense and see the motion. Anything from overhead, shadows, that's another one. But any kind of movements and shadows, that'll spook the fish. But a lot of times people aren't really aware of their footsteps. Make soft footsteps if you can. Another helpful hint for you beginning and intermediate type casters who are new to these high mountain lakes, I have also found that you don't have to have a really long leader and a long tippet section. Both my parents were great dry fly casters, and they use long tippets. I mean like 12, 15 feet. And have these beautiful dry fly casts, false casting, and the parachute and land really softly. What I found is that if you can get away with it, go with the 6-foot leader. And I mean leader, tippet to fly, that whole length, 6 feet, 5 feet. Try it. If you can get away with it, it'll help your casting tremendously, especially if you got some wind and breezes to deal with. The breeze actually just picked up a little bit here this morning. You can always add more tippet on and lengthen the overall length of your leader.